Chilling tales for dark nights.
Exham Priory. Uninhabited for 3 centuries, architects and antiquarians love to examine this strange relic of forgotten centuries, especially so since the priory stood on the site of a prehistoric temple, maybe as old as Stonehenge. And this was my ancestral home. After the Civil War ended, we all moved north where I grew up, did pretty well, wealthy even. I eventually turned my attention to my English heritage and resolved to purchase and restore the family property. I bought Exham Priory in 1918, just at the very same time my son had returned as a maimed invalid of the Great War. During those 2 years that he lived, I thought of nothing but his care. I even placed my business under the direction of partners. And following his untimely death, I then resolved to spend my remaining years with this new possession, this house. It was during the summer of 1923 when I moved in. Captain Norris was a plump, amiable young man, and I had relied on him to oversee the coming restoration.
Sir, I must say the restoration was rather hard work indeed.
And you say nothing much remains of the old place now, except the shell, is that it?
Afraid not, sir. Lucky we managed that. That jumble of tottering medieval ruins you saw. Of course, it's still covered with lichens and honeycombed with the rook's nest and so on. It's still perched rather dangerously on the cliff. But we took out the floors and other interior features. I'd say nothing except the stone walls of the separate towers remain today.
Well, Captain Norris, I'm surprised you took it over during these past 5 years.
Oh, well, I did admire your son, sir. Wonderful chap he was. Well, I'm just happy to help you in the restoration, and I hope you'll be happy here.
Oh, I think I will. Why wouldn't I?
Well, they say the villagers tell of some rather wild stories, sir.
Oh, you mean ancient forbidden rites, devil worshippers, all that?
A cult, sir, yes, and feared through half the kingdom around about, I'd say 1000 A.D. Very strange and powerful reclusive order. And as for those stone walls, apparently they didn't need walls to keep out the curious. No one was that inquisitive. That is, ever since the tragedy.
Tragedy? Norris, is there something you're not telling me?
Oh, you wouldn't want to go into all that rubbish.
You must be referring to my third cousin, Exham's original owner. What is it? What tragedy?
Well, it's hard to even think about it. Watch your step now. Hideous, really, and on top of that, unexplained.
No, please, go on.
Well, I should think you might need a brandy before I continue. I bloody well know I do. You see, your uncle, Chamberlain de la Poor, along with 5 of his children, and indeed several servants, were brutally murdered here. Yet not the third son, your cousin Alfred. He was the only survivor of this family, and now Alfred was denounced as the murderer. You see, that's the reason he fled to Virginia, and that's where he started his own family, the Delapour. And so, after that, Exham Priory has remained empty, though later, of course, it was taken over by my family until its rightful owner, you, sir, should wish to deal with it as your proper family property.
Well, apparently warmed by the slowly depleting brandy, Norris talked on about an inner cult in the family, presided over by the head of the house, and sometimes closed except to maybe a few members. He heard tales of screams and howlings in the barren, wind-swept valley beneath the limestone cliff, and of the graveyard stenches after the spring rains, and something about a servant who'd gone mad at what he saw in the priory in the full light of day. Oh yes, and the country folk hated it. They had hated it hundreds of years before when my ancestors lived there, and they hated it now with all that moss and mold of neglect on it. So it wasn't long before I knew I now owned a vile and accursed house. I finally convinced the country dwellers how little I knew of my family history, yet even then they sullenly disliked me. I guess what the people couldn't forgive, perhaps, was that I'd come to restore a symbol that was so disgusting to them. Rationally or not, they viewed Exham Priory as nothing less than a haunt of fiends and werewolves. Something strange must have happened back then. The fireside tales were of the most grisly description, all the ghastlier because of this vague and cloudy history. It was as though my ancestors were some kind of, a race of hereditary demons responsible for the occasional disappearance of villagers through several generations. But of course all these myths and ballads were just crude superstition, really, but still, it sickened me, especially those that referred to my ancestors directly. A few of these tales made me wish I had learned more, but most vivid of all, there was the dramatic epic of the rats. Yes, the lean, filthy, ravenous army which had swept all before it and simply devoured fowl, cats, dogs, hogs, sheep, and even 2 unfortunate human beings before they were through. And around that unforgettable rodent army a whole separate cycle of myths revolves as it scattered among the village homes and brought curses and horrors in its wake. Well, I managed to suppress those images and tried to remember my reason for rebuilding the priory, and when it was completed I viewed the great rooms, wainscoted walls, vaulted ceilings, and broad staircases with pride, and I looked forward to restoring at last the family name which ended in me. I would reside here permanently and prove that a Delapour, not Delapour any longer, wasn't a fiend. As I said, I moved in that summer of 1923. My household consisted of 7 servants and 9 cats. My eldest cat, Niggerman, was 7 years old and had come with me when I had moved. For 5 days our routine proceeded with nothing unusual, and I had now managed to glean some very incidental accounts of the infamous slaying and also of the flight of Walter Delapour.
It appears that he was indeed accused of having killed all the other members of his household in their sleep.
Yes, but when did this thing happen?
About 2 weeks after a rather shocking discovery, which changed, apparently.
He told no one?
Possibly the servants who abetted him.
Abetted?
Oh, yes. The deliberate slaughter was largely condoned by the villagers, and I suppose no one felt it necessary to inform the law. Its perpetrator escaped, honored, unharmed, and undisguised.
Why?
Well, think of it, sir. He had purged the land of an ancient curse. But what had prompted an act so terrible, I'm afraid I can scarcely even conjecture.
So Walter Delapour must have known for years the sinister tales about his family. Had he then witnessed some appalling ancient rite himself? Or had he stumbled upon some frightful and revealing symbol in the priory or its vicinity? There seemed no answer. It was July 22nd when the first incident occurred, something so simple as to be almost negligible and couldn't possibly have been noticed under the circumstances. Remember I said since I was in a building practically fresh and new except for the walls? I was surrounded by a well-balanced staff of servants, so any anxiety or concern would have been absurd despite the locality, but my old black cat, whose moods I know so well, was undoubtedly alert and anxious to an extent wholly out of keeping with his character. He roved from room to room, restless and disturbed, and sniffed constantly about the walls, those walls which formed part of the old Gothic structure. Yes, I know how trite this sounds, yet I can't stop thinking about it. What was he sensing? Then, the following day, a servant complained of restlessness among all the cats in the house, and even as he spoke I saw the slinky form of my old cat creeping along the west wall, and scratching at the new panels which overlaid the ancient stone. Norris, there must be some particular odor or emanation from the old stonework, imperceptible maybe to human senses, but not a cat's, even through the new woodwork.
Yes, quite right. I fancy it's mice or rats, possibly.
No, there have been no rats here for 300 years. Even the field mice of the surrounding country could hardly be found in these high walls where they'd never been known to stray.
Yes, quite correct. I agree. It would be quite incredible for field mice to infest the priory in such a sudden and unprecedented fashion.
That night I prepared for bed in the west tower, and seeing that Niggerman, my pet cat, was with me, I shut the heavy Gothic door, switched off the light, and sank into the carved and canopied four-poster bed with my old friend in his accustomed place across my feet. I guess I must have fallen quietly asleep because I recall a distinct sense of having strange dreams. And the cat jerked violently from his sleeping position. He was looking intensely at a point which to me was nothing, but as I watched, I knew it was definitely something. But what I do know is this. I heard a low, distinct sort of scurrying, like rats or mice, and right then the cat jumped on the tapestry, dragging it to the floor with its weight, and that's when I saw the damp, ancient wall of stone, patched here and there by the restorers, and even though I didn't see any rodents of any kind, the cat raced up and down the floor, clawing the fallen drapery and seemingly trying at times to insert a paw between the wall and the oaken floor. He found nothing, and finally he returned wearily to his place across my feet. And as for me, I hadn't moved all that time. But I didn't sleep again that night. So lighting a candle, I opened the door and went out in the gallery toward the stairs to my study, Niggerman following at my heels. Then suddenly the cat darted ahead of me and vanished down the old stone steps. As I followed him, I became suddenly aware of sounds in the great room below. An unmistakable sound. The oak-paneled walls were alive with rats, scampering and milling rats. Niggerman was racing about with the fury of a bewildered hunter. Reaching the bottom, I switched on the light, but the rats continued their stampede with such force and focus I could finally see in the way they were moving a definite direction. These creatures, in untold numbers, apparently were engaged in one stupendous migration from inconceivable heights to some deep destination far, far below. Suddenly I heard steps in the corridor, and in another moment 2 servants pushed open the massive door. They were searching the house for some unknown source of disturbance which had thrown all the cats into a snarling panic and caused them to plunge impulsively down several flights of stairs and squat howling before the closed door to the subcellar. I asked them if they had heard the rats, but they said no. And when I turned to call their attention to the sounds in the panels, I realized that the noise had ceased. Along with the 2 men, I went down to the door of the subcellar, but I found the cats already gone, disappeared. So later I resolved to explore this crypt below, but for now I just made a round of the traps. All were sprung, yet they were all empty. And following a troubled and restless night, I made a call to Captain Norris to assist me in exploring this ancient subcellar once and for all. He joined me first thing the next day.
Well, nothing. Absolutely nothing unusual, Captain. No, you're quite right, sir. Nothing I can see, at least, but
what?
Well, just knowing that this vault was built by Roman hands, every low arch and massive pillar Romans, possibly in the age of the Caesars. I say it's rather thrilling.
Well, not long after that, there was a lot more to listen to behind that closed door at the head of the stone steps. It was a veritable nightmare of feline yelling and clawing while Niggerman was running excitedly around the bare stone walls. And again I heard the same babble of scurrying rats that had distressed me the night before, and a heightened terror now rose within me. These rats must be burrowing and sliding in those walls that I had thought were solid limestone blocks. And if these were living vermin, why didn't Norris hear their disgusting commotion? Why did he urge me to listen to the cats outside? And why did he guess wildly and vaguely at what could have aroused them? By the time I had managed to tell him as rationally as I could what I thought I was hearing, the last fading impression of the scurrying had begun to die out. Yet I could still hear them, retreating still downward and far underneath the deepest of sub-cellars, till it seemed as if the whole cliff below were riddled with questing rats. Norris then motioned to me to notice that the cats at the door had ceased their clamor, all except for my own. My fear of the unknown was at this point very, very great.
I say, look at that.
What is it? What do you see, Norris?
I believe... Hang on, old chap. There. Well, your cat was pawing this rather large... Oh, my, very large block of... stone.
Look, the flame. It's flickering. There must be a draft. Can you feel it down there?
Oh, yes, most certainly. It seems to me coming from a crack within the floor. I wonder, is this some sort of vault?
On the evening of August 7th, nothing unusual had occurred. The cats had been perfectly calm, and not a trap in the house had been sprung. Again, I had retired in my own tower chamber with Nigaman across my feet. Sleep came quickly, but so did the dreams. Hideous dreams. Something about a Roman feast, but with something horrible on a covered platter, and then came something about a pig farmer and his filthy herd in the shadowy grotto. Yet when I awoke, it was full daylight, with normal sounds in the house below. The rats, living or imagined, hadn't troubled me, and the cat was quiet. All was now ready, and at 11 a.m., bearing powerful electric searchlights and implements of excavation, Norris, now accompanied by several curious investigators whom he'd convinced to join us, went down to the sub-cellar and bolted the door behind us. Nigaman was with us, which was a good thing lest we encountered, well, just in case.
Look here, this central altar. Why, it looks like it's balanced by some sort of counterweight. Give us a hand, lads. Let's see if we might lift. That's it. Lift it. Tilt it. Just tilt it a bit more. Tilt it. That's it. Tilt it just a bit more.
What we saw below us was overwhelming. A horror we hadn't been prepared for. Through a nearly square opening in the tiled floor, sprawling on a flight of stone steps so remarkably worn that it was little more than an inclined plane at the center, was a gruesome array of human, or maybe semi-human bones. And over all were the marks of rodent gnawing. The skulls indicated a sort of primitive semi-apedom. Above the hellishly littered steps arched another, even more descending passage, seemingly chiseled from the solid rock, yet conducting a cool breeze with something of freshness in it. We didn't pause long before we began to clear a passage down the steps. I must be very deliberate now and choose my words. After plowing down a few steps through the gnawed bones, we noticed that there was light ahead. A few steps more, and suddenly we were literally stunned by what we saw. In fact, Thornton, a psychic investigator, actually fainted in the arms of the dazed man who stood behind him. Norris, his plump face utterly white and flabby, simply cried out in some inarticulate gibberish, while I think that what I did was to gasp or hiss and cover my eyes, while the man behind me simply whispered, "My God." It was a twilit grotto of enormous height, stretching away farther than any eye could see. A hellish, subterranean world of limitless mystery and horrible suggestion. There were buildings and other architectural remains, and in one terrified glance I saw a weird pattern of monoliths, but all these were dwarfed by the ghoulish spectacle presented by the general surface of the ground. Everywhere around the steps extended an insane tangle of human bones, or bones at least as human as those on the steps. Like a foamy sea they stretched, some fallen apart, but others wholly or partly articulated as skeletons. And all the bones were gnawed, mostly by rats, and some by others of the half-human drove. Mixed with them were many tiny bones of rats. fallen members, I suspect, of a lethal army. Oh, it's a wonder that any man among us could have lived and kept his sanity through that hideous day of discovery. No one could conceive a scene more wildly incredible, more frenetically repellent, or more gothically grotesque than the twilit grotto through which we staggered, each stumbling on revelation after revelation, trying to keep from thinking of the events which must have taken place there 300 years, or 1,000, or 2,000, or 10,000 years ago. It was the antechamber of hell. Whatever had been kept in stone pens from which they must have broken in their last delirium of hunger or rat fear. There had been great herds of them, evidently fattened on coarse vegetables, whose remains could be found as a sort of poisonous muck at the bottom of huge stone bins. Then a terrible row of 10 stone cells with rusty bars. 3 were occupied by skeletons of what appeared normal, and on the bony finger of one, I found a seal ring with my own coat of arms. Meanwhile, Sir William found a vault with far older cells below the Roman chapel, but these cells were empty, and below them was a low crypt with cases of formally arranged bones, some of them bearing terrible parallel inscriptions carved in Latin and Greek, I think. Human skulls, but only that, perhaps maybe slightly more human than a gorilla's, and which bore incredible runes or carvings. And through all this horror my cat stalked unperturbed. Once I saw him monstrously perched atop a mountain of bones and wondered at the secrets that might lie behind his yellow eyes. Turning to that apparently boundless depth of midnight cavern where no ray of light from the cliff could penetrate, we would never know what sightless, Stygian worlds yawned beyond the little distance we went. We didn't venture further. Such secrets were not good for mankind. But there was plenty to involve us close at hand. We hadn't gone far before our searchlight showed that appalling infinity of pits in which the rats had feasted, and whose sudden lack of replenishment had driven the ravenous rodent army first to turn on the living herds of starving things, and then to burst forth in that historic orgy of devastation which the peasants will never forget. Once my foot slipped near a horribly yawning brink, and I had a moment of paralytic fear, and then there came a sound from that inky, boundless, farther distance that I thought I knew, and I saw my old black cat dart past me like a winged Egyptian god, straight into the vast gulf of the unknown. But I was not far behind, because there was no doubt, after another second, it was the horrible scurrying of those fiend-born rats, always questing for new horrors and determined to lead me on, even into those grinning caverns of Earth's very center. That's when the searchlight went black, but still, I kept running. I heard voices and yowls and echoes, but above all rose that wicked, insidious scurrying, gently rising like a stiff, bloated corpse in a black, putrid sea. Something bumped into me, something soft and plump. That must have been the rats. The viscous, gelatinous, ravenous army that feast on the dead and the living. But why shouldn't rats eat a Dilapor, as a Dilapor eats forbidden things? They're worried, my boy, damn them all. No, I tell you, I am not that demon swineherd in the Twilit Grotto. It was not Edward Norris' fat face on that flabby fungus baggy. Who says I am a Dilapor? He'll end, yes. My boy died. Shall Norris hold the lands of a Dilapor? No, it's voodoo, I tell you. Blood, slick it out, the guts, which is sweat me, making a matter. Well, that's what they say I said when they found me in the blackness after 3 hours. Found me crouching in the blackness over the plump, half-eaten body of Captain Norris, with my own cat leaping and tearing at my throat. Well, now they've demolished Exon Priory, they've taken my faithful cat away from me, and, they've shut me into this barred room at Hanwell Asylum, with fearful whispers about my heredity and experiences. Thornton? Oh, he's in the next room, but they won't let me see him. They won't let me talk to him. They're also trying to suppress most of the facts concerning the Priory. When I speak of poor Norris, they accuse me of, well, a hideous thing, but they must know I didn't do it. They must know it was the rats. The slithering, scurrying rats whose scampering will never let me sleep. The demon rats that race behind the padding in this room and beckon me down to greater horrors than I've ever known. The rats they can never hear. The rats in the wall.
Chilling tales for dark nights.